Hello and welcome to Moderate Fantasy Violence, a podcast about pop culture and the world around it. I'm Nick.
And I'm Alistair.
And this episode we'll be covering the second season of Muslim punk band sitcom We Are Lady Parts on Channel 4 in the UK, and then we'll be covering the second and final volume of Newburn, a crime comic by Chip Zdarsky and Jacob Phillips, which we covered the first volume of last year. But before all of that, Alistair, what else have you seen or done?
So I went to the cinema to see an interesting French science fiction film called The Beast. This is a film I wanted to catch at London Film Festival but couldn't fit it into my schedule last year. And yeah, so it's been released in cinemas, released in some art house cinemas. So I decided to pop down and see it. It's got Lee Seydoux and George McKay in it. So yeah, I think it's a fairly high-profile French film. The plot follows a woman who goes to this unusual form of therapy when they trace back through her past lives to remove trauma to like purge her DNA, as in like, yeah, back through her ancestors. So it's kind of a sort of quite strange film. It's got three plot lines to it. One which is set in the future where the woman's having this therapy, and then two plot lines in the past. One which is set in our present in contemporary California following Lee Seydoux, her character Gabrielle, who's trying to be an actress in Hollywood. And then the other plot line is set in 19th century Paris. Yeah, when Lee Seydoux plays a woman who's unhappily married. And in all three of the plot lines, she meets the same man, played by George McKay, and they have different interactions with different levels of sort of trauma. It's an interesting film. It's got some good performances. It's very tense. I certainly recommend it if you like your weird sci-fi.
So is the focus here on the sci-fi, or is it more of a sort of character piece against the sci-fi backdrop?
Yeah, I think it's more of a character piece, just about these characters and their interacting. It's the sort of, it doesn't really go into the kind of the details of how the technology or how it works. It's less of a focus on that. It's just sort of I guess kind of a background thing to facilitate the plot.
Oh, fair enough. I've enjoyed plenty of those kind of films, so it's good. It works.
No, I liked it. It's very strange. It's also interesting. It's in several languages. It kind of moves between French and English sometimes in like the same sentence, which is unusual and interesting. I quite like the future world that they've built up. There's things they don't explain, like for some reason every time they go outside they have to wear these weird masks. It's just like never really explained why. Is there a pandemic in the future? Is there something wrong with the air? Who knows? Also like bizarrely empty Paris of the future with like very few people in it. Again, never explained what's going on. Yeah, there's some interesting things, such as in the present storyline, the George McKay character is this online angry men's rights activist or something like that, or incel, I guess, is this guy who makes videos for social media in his car about how much he hates women and is determined to punish them, which I guess is touching on some contemporary political currents. And he's become fixated on the Gabrielle character as a means of extracting his revenge against all women.
Okay, some classic incel satire.
So it's touching on that, which builds to a sort of quite tense home invasion bit at the end. So it's a good film. I'd recommend it. It's very strange. It left me feeling deservedly odd. It's got some weird emotional bits and twists. I don't want to say too much about the later parts of the film in case people see it. But one of those things that leaves me kind of feel that was, stirred up some strange emotions. And it's definitely got that sort of French arty weirdness. Like the last few moments of the film are quite bizarre. Then it sort of stops. And rather than credits, it's just a QR code you can scan. So
okay, that's
new.
New. I don't know how the people who are credited feel about it, but
So it's I guess that's one way of saying it's pushing boundaries. It's certainly one of those films that pushes boundaries in many ways.
Okay, you think the whole thing's generated by AI?
Hopefully not. Although apparently there is a film generated by AI or partly written by AI. My partner has seen it and said it was very predictable. It's a romantic drama, I think, on Netflix. I can't remember what it's called. But we have got as far as the first AI co-written film.
Considering the amount of complaining about AI I've seen on my Twitter timeline, I'm actually quite surprised that I had no idea about this existed until now.
Yeah.
It's interesting. I look forward to more people discovering that and getting angry about it.
Yeah. Anyway, that is one of the newer frontiers. Yeah, I do think this is, interesting. It's really, this film is like really bending genre in the sense that it's got a, I don't know, standard, I don't want to say, seems like a bit harsh, but like Parisian drama in the past bits, you know, they go to beautiful art galleries and gardens, and Lisa Liu is a woman who's unhappily married, but she doesn't have much choice, and she meets a man who brings some light into her life. It's all a bit Middlemarch, but French. So that, you know, and there's that, and then there's the present day one is more of a sort of like horror-y type thing with like, yeah, this guy who's like stalking this woman. Then there's the sci-fi bit in the future, which has some kind of, yeah, some more like technological elements to it. So yeah, it's mixing genres. There's some unusual twists in there, yeah, which in terms of like, yeah, the plot definitely doesn't go in the directions you'd expect it to go in. Again, don't want to say too much. Yeah, there's definitely, I feel this film is, yeah, it's definitely trying to out there, push boundaries, push the medium forwards, do something unusual, the way it mixes genres together in a way that I think in the past some people, arty people, might have been like, ooh, sci-fi, you know, turning my nose up at that a bit, you know, fine with like period dramas and political thrillers. But this is mixing them all up together, which I really liked.
Yeah, no, it sounds interesting. I enjoy a nice sort of genre film with a bit of a weird twist. Kind of like, what was it, Love Lies Bleeding a few episodes ago. That was good. I have no idea if this is at all similar to that.
They're sort of similar in the sense that there's a sort of genre sort of element to it. Like that had like, you know, that was like a crime film, and this one's, yeah, a sci-fi film. But it's got this sort of edge of weirdness that breaks it out of its genre box into something that's different and strange, which is what makes it interesting. There's plenty of films, you know, about a drifter, you know, who meets someone and there's a bit of a crime spree and they get involved with like gangster. There's many films like that, but this one had something that made it different and special. Yeah, this kind of way to like play with genre and do something a bit weird. So yeah, I guess that's the similarity.
Yeah, that does actually sound interesting. If it ever ends up on a streaming service, I might watch it. I know I say this at the end of almost every single one of your recommendations, but I might.
Yeah, we'll see if this one makes it to Netflix. Most likely to be on Mubi. But yeah, if you get the chance to see it and you're interested in an unusual sci-fi recommendation, Lisa Liu's done quite a few interesting sci-fi films. Obviously, she was in Dune, but also Crimes of the Future, which is a great film, but very upsetting. I wouldn't recommend it to everyone. But yeah, if you get the chance to track this down, I would strongly recommend it. That's what I've been up to recently. Nick, do you have anything to recommend to our listeners?
Well, while Alistair's been watching the lesser-known French films that stretch the boundaries of genre, I've been watching, well, technically this is two things, but they're quite interlinked. I watched Sonic the Hedgehog 2, the sequel, obviously, to that Sonic movie they did on Paramount+. And then once I'd seen that, that's a couple of years old, but the more recent thing I then watched is, of course, the Knuckles spin-off series, which dropped only about a month or so ago. So I watched both those things. I'd be lying if I said I didn't partly watch them because they're on my list of things I have to watch before I can cancel Paramount+, but nonetheless I have seen them. As you may or may not know, I don't know how much attention people pay to the Sonic franchise, to be honest, but if you saw the first one, they've sort of, rather than making a straightforward adaptation of Sonic as an alien on the world of Mobius fighting Dr. Robotnik, like in most of the games and cartoons and comics before this, the current live-action movie franchise is a sort of family comedy about Sonic ending up in a small town in America and getting adopted by James Marsden. Rather than being a sort of cool adult or teen hero, he's kind of treated like James Marsden's child son, and together they fight Robotnik and learn important lessons about love. Robotnik, of course, famously played by Jim Carrey in manic scene-stealing mode. And yes, and in the second episode, or movie, as I believe they're still called, they inevitably brought in the rest of Sonic's furry supporting cast. Well, some of them. They brought in Tails and Knuckles, basically. So we've got as far as the third Mega Drive game. Knuckles, interestingly, voiced by Idris Elba.
That's a great casting.
I know.
Say, I mean, they really did pull out the casting here between Jim Carrey and Idris Elba. Yeah.
Idris Elba, yeah, I don't know if he's having fun, but he does get to do an entertaining sort of stoic warrior thing. Knuckles' entire thing is sort of storming around going, I am a mighty echidna warrior. What is this thing you call fun? And yeah, it's entertaining enough. Anyway, so yeah, attempting to keep the two things separate. The Sonic 2 movie is, I think, slightly better than the first one in that they've managed to mix in a bit more actual action with the silly family comedy. Because obviously, you know, the film is what it is, but some of the silly family comedy stuff was a bit generic and a bit not particularly Sonic, whereas the second one felt a bit more like an actual Sonic the Hedgehog film, while still maintaining the heartwarming lessons about love and slapstick comedy scenes involving Jim Carrey and James Marsden. The Knuckles show Knuckles and a supporting character from the Sonic films, the sort of comedy incompetent policeman called Wade Whipple. They go off together so Knuckles can teach Wade Whipple how to be a real hero. And it's, to be honest, it's probably better than the Sonic films, the Knuckles show. It's just very knowingly silly. There's one episode which is an extended rock opera telling the story of Knuckles' origin. Yeah, written by the Lonely Island guys, I think, and starring Julian Barrett as one of the main vocalists.
Oh wow, that sounds really good actually.
It's It's baffling, yeah. The whole thing, of course, is a hallucination after the lead character Wade loses a motorcycle duel with Julian Barrett. He ends up lying on the floor hallucinating this rock opera for most of the episode, and then they have a massive showdown involving bowling, which is quite clearly drawing heavily from dodgeball because it's just ridiculous.
Okay, and it's still Idris Elba voicing Knuckles?
Idris Elba is still there, yeah, playing this sort of stoic version of Knuckles. Oh, and Stockard Channing turns up as Wade Whipple's mother as well. It's always nice to see her.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, it's very strange. To be honest, it's mostly a Wade Whipple show with Knuckles as his sort of comedy stoic fish out of water sidekick. But taken on those terms, as long as you're not actually here for like a dead straight Sonic show or Knuckles show in this case, it's actually quite funny. It's actually quite fun. But it's still quite, light family entertainment. This probably will not be on the top 10 TV list, but for whatever it's worth, I had a laugh.
Okay, so I have questions.
Fire away.
From there's quite a lot of things in there. First of all, going back to Sonic and Sonic 2, the films.
Sure.
Do they work on this basis? Like, are they good, like, funny
Are they good?
kids that say, it doesn't. You've set out a case for like what they're trying to achieve. It's an interesting.
It's a cartoon blue hedgehog, Alistair. How adult is it really going to be? Should Sonic the Hedgehog be kids' entertainment? Let's talk about it.
I mean, what I meant is like, is it actually funny and heartwarming? You can aim to make this kind of silly, kind of sounds quite 90s actually. It's the sort of thing they'd have done in the 90s if they'd done.
It does sometimes feel slightly retrograde, but then again, it's Sonic the Hedgehog does kind of have that 90s cool dude thing going on, which unavoidably feels a bit retrograde.
Yeah, I suppose the 90s are back in. But it's interesting they decided to take this approach rather than say what the Mario film did, which is did a full CGI animation kind of basically in the Mario world. They updated the humor a bit to be like post-Avengers wink and a nod humor, but doing it in the world of Mario and doing it fairly straight up, whereas they've varied this. They've taken Sonic out of that world, put him in our world of live actors, and and that's doing something different, and I guess they're taking a gamble there, and I guess is it funny? Does it work?
The Sonic movie is funny in a sort of gentle chuckles way. You do feel bad for the little guy, and he's lonely, he's on Earth, away from his people, with only James Marsden to talk to. You do feel bad for him. And Jim Carrey's Robotnik is such a prick that, you do end up rooting for Sonic to smack him around. So yeah, it does more or less work on a very sort of kids family adventure basis. I enjoyed the Knuckles show slightly more because it went a bit sillier. The comedy in Sonic is sometimes quite broad and quite slapstick, whereas the comedy in Knuckles is a bit more surreal and silly, which was a bit more entertaining.
Yeah, that does sound good. And Jim Carrey's good. I mean, yeah, it's weird. He seems to have dialed it back a lot, unless he's done lots of things I'm not aware of. But I don't think he's had like a big film in a while. I mean, he did that second Kick-Ass film, which he sort of disowned after he was in it because he thought it was too violent. Which is a shame because I thought he was good in that film, and he'd done a series of Turkeys before that and actually did a good performance, but he wasn't happy with that film. But yeah, and then he seemed to disappear for a while. I mean, he's made vast sums of money, he's getting on. I can see he might want to enjoy retirement. But he came back for this, is he still got some of that, 90s magic from The Mask and Ace Ventura that made him a household name?
I mean, yeah, he's still doing his Jim Carrey thing. He still talks a lot. He still sort of twitches and bounces around the screen a lot. It's not quite as manic as it was when he was younger, but he's still doing it. It's, again, for those of us who grew up reading Sonic the Comic and imagined Robotnik as more of a seriously threatening dictator, Jim Carrey, I don't know, he does do a sort of good undercurrent of menace. Like, he's bouncing around, he's rambling and quipping, but he does still successfully communicate the sense that if you piss him off, he will kill you, which I guess is what you want from this sort of villain in a kid's show, this sort of largely silly guy with this slight undercurrent of menace.
Yeah, they've done the thing that we've talked about before of casting someone who's well-known and talented in the villain role where they can really camp it up and enjoy themselves as a big villain. Although, yeah, Jim Carrey is someone whose best days are definitely behind him.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think he technically might have announced his retirement from acting. I think that happened at some point. Possibly either directly before or directly after the release of Sonic 2. Although I think he may now have been tempted to come back for Sonic 3, so who knows what words really mean anymore.
Yeah, I mean, he's just probably these are probably a lot less challenging than carrying a whole film like he did when he had, like, again, whole films resting on his comedic performances, from Bruce Almighty through to his big hitters, like, The Mask and things like that. He was a great comedic performer. He's very, very good at basically, being slapstick, clowning, silly. There's a reason why he became so popular, and he's very good, especially at facial expressions. I think he's really good at unusual, like, kind of bizarre facial expressions that are very funny.
Well, yeah, but he's basically playing a cartoon character. I mean, Robotnik is the one who's actually human. He always was, even in the games. But getting Jim Carrey in does work as a way of having effectively a human version of a cartoon villain.
Yeah, that's the closest you're going to get, really, to a human cartoon character. Is this full of lots of winks and nods to the grown-ups who played a game in the 90s on their Mega Drive, as you said, and are now probably watching it with their children?
There's a few bits and bobs, yeah. I mean, obviously, Tails and Knuckles show up. He does some business with rings. I think the town they start in is called Green Hills, which is a callback to the first zone of the first game, which is called the Green Hill Zone. There's a few backdrops and zones I vaguely recognise from the games. I think the robot he uses at the end of the first film is one of the bosses from the games. So yeah, there's lots of bits and bobs. The robots are a bit sort of 21st century Apple tech, which is kind of disappointing. As someone who's played the Sonic games and seen that Robotnik's technology is normally like robot animals, I was hoping for more robot animals, but no, it's all very smooth, shiny, whitey, plasticky, roboty, droney things.
Yeah. Interesting. It sounds good. I see why you've homed in on the Knuckles show as probably the best incarnation of this. I guess partly because it's a TV show that doesn't have to have the broad appeal of something that's released in the cinema. But it seems like they've got streaming service, streaming wars money behind this, and which they seem to have spent on the casting.
Well, yeah, I mean, there's a clear budget cut for the TV version. Like, most of the expensive people for the movie are not in it. There's no Jim Carrey in the Knuckles show. And, yeah, Sonic shows up for, like, one bit in one episode. Occasionally in some bits you realise they are intentionally keeping the CGI Knuckles off screen for extended chunks of time to save money, obviously. Which some might say is a cheat when it's basically his show, but yes, you at some point have to accept that a lot of it is basically the Wade Whipple show.
Yeah, I mean that makes sense as a way of focusing on that character because he doesn't require 3D rendering.
Well, yeah, and Knuckles is the only CGI character in it, so yeah, a lot of the time they just have him quietly off doing something else or unconscious or something, so they can just spend as much time as possible with Wade, who is an actor who they can just film. So yeah, it's fun. I don't get the feeling it's set the world that I liked, in that outside of the Sonic the Comic podcast I listened to, I've not really heard anyone talk about it. So I don't know if this is going to change the world or get a second season, but it's quite a weird niche thing they've done, to be honest, which is just sitting on what is probably about the fourth place streaming service. But yeah, if you've got Paramount Plus, as I do for now at least, then this is there and it's kind of fun.
Yeah, I mean the film seems to have been successful in the sense of like they've made a sequel and they're doing a third one now, I think, with Shadow and various other characters. Yeah, I think that maybe, although it doesn't seem to have a huge cultural impact, people are definitely going out to see the Sonic film. It's probably a lot of, they've hit the sweet spot of 90s kids who are now parents. And basically they'll take their kids to that because they get retro vibes from it and their kids get entertainment. And, I guess there's some element of passing the torch to the next generation.
They have actually made a kids film. It is a silly kids comedy film that children can actually enjoy. They could have made Sonic as a serious post-apocalyptic adventure with Sonic fighting back against the Robotnik regime, but they haven't done that, and maybe they're being rewarded.
Yeah, it's interesting that this has struck a chord. But yeah, I'm glad that, I don't know. As someone who was a Sonic fan as a kid and played those Mega Drive games, it lingers on. It's not faded entirely from memory like Streets of Rage.
Didn't they do Streets of Rage 4 like 2 or 3 years ago?
Well, yeah, I guess it hasn't been given the film or TV treatment, nostalgic film or TV treatment. Maybe it's only a matter of time.
I mean, we have said before, but it seems like video games are the next big thing to get mined after comics, so you never know.
Next up, this episode, we will be discussing the second season of We Are Lady Parts, created by Ninda Manzoor. In this season, the Muslim punk band Lady Parts has built an underground following, and now they want to record an album. However, they have no money, have lost their rehearsal space, and have to deal with a new rival Muslim punk band, Second Wife. With interest from a major label and the characters facing relationship problems, can the band hold together? We've seen the complete second season of this show from Channel 4. Nick, what did you make of it?
Yeah, this was great fun. As with the first season, it's a really well-characterised sort of comedy drama. Every character has a very clearly defined personality and storylines. Yes, it has something to say about the struggles of being, a Muslim woman in a punk band and how you're perceived, but yeah, crucially, it's also very funny and there's not a bad character in it. There's a very good sort of distinction between the core 5 main characters. I really enjoyed this. I don't think we reviewed the first season, even though we did both watch it. But yeah, that was really good, but I did kind of similar to The Bear, come away at the end thinking, they could never make any more of that, and I'd be fine. But yeah, they have made more, and again, much like The Bear, they've done another good job. Yeah,
I really enjoyed this as well. It was funny. Yeah, as you say, it's a great character-driven comedy. So yeah, I think what I really like about it is kind of, it's not got any of that sort of like postmodernism that we've come from a lot of sitcoms recently. It's kind of in some ways like a quite traditional sitcom. In some ways, it's really not, because no one's done a sitcom before about a Muslim punk band. I'm struggling to think of any sitcoms that focus on a punk band or many that focused on Muslims, let alone the two together. But in some ways, the approach is quite standard in that, like, a lot of the comedy arises from characters being pushed out of their comfort zones, trying to hide things or wanting two things at the one time. Lots of lack of communication leads to comedy. It's kind of got a sort of classic sitcom feel to it.
Yeah, but it doesn't have quite the sitcom structure of, a different setup in every episode and this sort of constant resetting. There is like a very clear plot going through the entire thing, and it does have like cliffhangers. But it does ultimately respect the kind of rule of comedy, things are bad out there, but love and friendship and solidarity can get us through it.
Yeah, and I suppose it's, as you say, a comedy drama to some degree in that, there's a dramatic arc plot. Yeah, the story about them signing with a major label and, having to make artistic compromises is a dramatic story in which the characters are put like under stress. Yeah, there is kind of that element to it. But I guess each episode usually has some kind of, comedic presence to it that like pushes the story forward. I mean, like they need money to record their album. So yeah, they do various silly things to make money, such as they play a wedding, they do try to do this fashion collaboration. And those are just kind of like setups for, miscommunication, misunderstanding and comedy pratfalls, which works very well.
Well, yeah, but a lot of it is, there's always this sort of feeling of lovable underdogs. You always just want them to, have a nice time and succeed. And a lot of the drama is, as you say, them falling out or them having misunderstandings or their needs overlapping. And a lot of the time the main source of worry or upset is that they've ruined their relationships with each other. Like, obviously, yes, it would also be nice if they succeeded as a band, but you kind of mostly just want them to be happy.
Yeah, exactly, yeah. And that's why they've got various bits of relationship drama. There's a love triangle, introducing a new love interest for the main character. And there's a plot line about one of the characters coming out to their family, which goes in an interesting direction and has, I think, an interesting finale. I don't want to say too much because it's the last episode and we're not dropping spoilers. But, I thought that was done with sort of sweetness and sensitivity. And that was nice.
I think it's a very self-aware show in terms of how a lot of these plot elements and stuff have been represented in other things. Like, I think the storyline you're talking about with Aisha, the character, who's worrying about coming out.
Yeah.
I think the show seems very aware of the way that sort of storyline has been presented in other media and wants to at least a little bit go against that or comment on the fact so that it doesn't have to go that way, which is probably as detailed as I can be without spoiling things.
Yeah, and it's surprising the direction it goes in, which, for someone who's seen a lot of TV and seen a lot of these plot lines before, an interesting new direction. But also, you just really invest in the characters and want them to be happy. And I like, the kind of the place they ended up at the end. It's similar to what you were saying before, and also like some great sitcoms like King of the Hill. There's usually like a sort of warm moment of like togetherness towards the end, celebrating friendship and things like that, which is the kind of positive vibes you want from a sitcom.
Yeah, and also mentioning the Aisha character. That character, the actor who plays her, Juliette Matamed, she's amazing at the sort of facial reactions, the sort of general sort of horrified look of, no, I'm well out of this. Do not bring me into this. Do not perceive me. What are you doing?
Yeah,
amazing, amazing work.
Yeah, very good comedy performer. Yeah, someone who's very expressive and things like that. And also, it is a great punk drummer character somebody who just seems to bubble and fizzle with rage continuously. Yeah,
and it's good the way it's sort of quickly, effectively. Because to be honest, my memory's quite bad. I watched the first series of this about 2 years ago, whenever it aired. I had not really fully remembered the exact dynamics between the characters, but the show walks me back into it to the point that I feel like I'm fully back in with all of them by about episode 2. So fair enough.
Yeah. There's a lot of good plot lines. I did like the plot line with Bisma, is the bass player. Just a small plot line of how she wants to stop wearing a headscarf because, there's a conflict between her identity as a Muslim woman who wears a headscarf, but also as a black woman who wants to, show off her hair, and hair is an important part of that culture. There's a conflict there, and which, spoils over with her, to her husband and her daughter, her daughter's now an angry teenager. It just, little sort of family drama things. In some ways, it's like fairly, again, standard sort of sitcom territory. You've got a character who's a mum, married, having sort of mild midlife crisis, search for identity, with an angry teenage daughter and a husband who doesn't quite get it. But also, I've never seen this before about, a black Muslim woman and the source of the identity is wearing a headscarf or not. Well, the source of the identity crisis is wearing a headscarf or not. So again, always with the show, it's doing something traditional and doing something unusual at the same time.
No, I think as you might be able to tell from the amount we've talked about it, a lot of the really good stuff here is the character stuff. The actual core band story is to be honest, perhaps a little bit more. I don't know. Again, the sort of the specifics are unique, but the basic thrust of it is what you expect. But again, ultimately, much like a lot of romantic comedies always end with a wedding, a story about a punk band bucking against the system will always end in a certain way.
Yeah. I mean, it's not too different to lots of things that are kind of like music or music adjacent films, and like they get offered a major label deal. No surprises where that plot line goes.
Well, yeah, exactly. Well, what compromises will this lead to, etc., etc., etc. Yes, that part is perhaps slightly more standard, but then again, I think that's the framework on which a lot of the other good stuff is hung.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's what makes it work.
And they do still have some interesting moments, like the cliffhanger to episode 5, which, again, I'm not going to spoil, is really good. It's actually in fact, almost a very unsettling bit of surreal horror. If anything, the fact that they have to then kind of breeze past it a bit in episode 6 to get to the cuddly comedy climax is almost a shame, because the episode 5 cliffhanger is genuinely quite difficult and strange to watch.
Yeah, the previous season really hit its stride towards the episode 5, 6, and the same here. Yeah, when they bring it all together at the end. Yeah, in those last 2 episodes, it is very, very good. Yeah, and that was a great, slightly out there bit at the end of episode 5. Again, dancing around spoilers, but yeah, that was one of the strongest bits of the whole show. And it's not funny as well, similar to how they stop the comedy sometimes for a moment of warmth and togetherness. That works well. Sometimes they stop the comedy for a moment of dramatic tension or unpleasantness, and that works as well. I guess it's the drama coming through as well as the comedy.
Well, yeah, I mean, you've earned it, I guess. I mean, there's a lot of good comedy material with the main character, Amina, talking about her villain era or whatever, general silliness, so you can eventually stop it for a couple of slightly more serious moments.
Yeah, exactly. And as you say, it is quite surreal and unusual, and I do like the direction of the show in the the kind of the technical direction. It's very much a post-spaced comedy. It's got that kind of fast-paced, frenetic direction that Spaced had. It's got the mixing in of kind of fantasy or sort of unusual elements, like as we discussed, there's the plot line with the character arguing with her daughter. She can use the TV remote to just pause her daughter for various points, and there's things like that. And they go off into some sort of like slightly, unusual bits, which is, again, the sort of thing they did in Spaced and things like that. I mean, this is from Nida Manzoor, who last year directed Polite Society, which was one of our favourite films of last year.
Which we compared a lot to Edgar Wright's.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it very much felt like a sort of Shaun the Dead Space type thing. She's clearly influenced by that wave of like late 90s, early aughts comedy, especially like stuff of like Simon Pegg and Edgar Wright were doing. She's probably of the age when that was very influenced her on her sort of early career or formation as a writer.
One of the plot points in this is that them identifying as millennials and slightly chafing against the other band, Second Wife, who are more Generation Z.
Yeah, that is a great name for a Muslim punk band, Second Wife. I think that is. They really nailed that, yeah.
I see which side you've chosen.
Yeah. Well, we can be on both sides. We're all supposed to be about celebrating the sisterhood.
No, I know. That is where we got to. Spoilers, yeah.
Yeah. I do like how they have the manifesto as well for the band, and every so often they get out, it's literally in the manifesto, which is this like big book they carry around. But yeah, no, it's kind of weird. It weaves quite a lot of different elements together into what is a very good show.
Yeah, and the ending once again leaves the characters in place for future seasons, but doesn't tease specifically. Like they could do more, they could just leave it here. I have no idea what's likely to happen, but it would be satisfying if they left it here. But I am more so than season 1, vaguely curious where it could go from here.
Yeah, I mean, like a 3-season arc would be, with like intro, middle bit, finale. Yeah, there's definitely things they've left like unresolved. So yeah, relationship drama, there's things they could pick up, but also they could easily leave it here and it would go down as, I'd say one of those great 2-season sitcoms, along with I'm Alan Partridge or
Fawlty
The Office.
Towers, The Office.
Fawlty Towers, ones, just kind of tight 2 seasons, 6 episodes apiece. Good stuff.
Yeah, it definitely doesn't need to go forever. I mean, like similar to, Derry Girls a few years ago, another one which went to 3 seasons, but didn't run on, a massive amount. And I don't think this needs to run on forever either, but I think they could do another year if they wanted to.
Yeah, I mean, on like peep shows, that when they got to 5 or 6, maybe even 7 seasons, and it just became repeating itself and, became too contrived and things like that. Yeah, Ideal, another one that, again, could have been a tight 2-3 season sitcom, but continue to the point of self-parody and and kind of staleness.
I mean, at some point you just get too used to the jokes. I mean, I think Ghosts finish after 5.
Ghost is the exception, where even though they didn't do anything silly like throw in loads of new characters, which shows can do to either add new life or totally ruin a show. But Ghost is the rare exception they managed to stick. I mean, they had quite a large cast. There was about, 10 or so core characters, including the living ones. Meant there was more combinations, I guess, to put things together in. But yeah, they did 5 seasons with just the same characters, and they were all good. But this was a much smaller cast. It's more similar to something like Peep Show 40 Towers, when there's only a certain amount of permutations you can do without radically changing the show or introducing something new.
But ultimately, it's also a lot more story-driven. Like, Ghosts basically only tweaked the setup a little bit every year to give them a little bit more to bounce off. Whereas this is very steadily moving the story forward every episode, which is both makes it very engaging and dramatic to watch, but also means it probably can't run forever.
Yeah. But I think they're aware enough of that, and hopefully aware enough of that. So, but I could see another season of this really working, or, as you say, walk away from this.
Yeah, no, this is excellent.
Yeah, and I like sort of like little nods and stuff to wider punk culture. Like I say, the manifesto jokes were very good. That's obviously a total like punk band thing. I did like also, a character mentioned who, clearly supposed to be Polystyrene from X-Ray Specs, a previous Muslim punk legend, which I think there was quite a nice nod there, especially as I know that Nida Manzoor is an X-Ray Specs fan because Identity plays out over the end credits of Polite Society. And I think is it Mira Sayel doing a cameo appearance playing that character?
I think so, yeah.
That was just a nice little nod to people who really know the music they're riffing on.
Yeah. It also had a cameo for Malala Yousafzai, which was particularly severe and hilarious.
Yeah, that was another surreal moments and stuff. Yeah, generally the music's really good as well. I did like the songs they write, especially that Glass Ceiling song in the final episode. That's a good one.
Yeah, now as an actual occasional liker of comedy music, yes, the songs in this are good. The episode where they cover "Oops, I Did It Again" was also, I would admit, strangely appealing.
Yeah, no, that was good. It's in the bit when there'll be a wedding band for a bit to make some money. Yeah, so if you've not watched this, it's all on Channel 4 or 4OD, or all 4, whatever it's called now. So I recommend diving into it.
Check it out.
Finally, this episode, we will be discussing Newburn, Volume 2, a crime comic from Chip Zdarsky and Jacob Phillips that follows private detective Easton Newburn and his protégé Emily as they investigate crime in New York on behalf of the major crime families in order to keep the peace between them. As Newburn's allies turn on him and his secrets start to become uncovered and loyalties are tested, not only to mention a journalist is investigating him and several crime families want revenge for members killed. With all this going on, how long can Newburn keep his head above water? We have read the second and final volume of this comic. Nick, what did you think of it?
Yeah, so this second half of Newburn is a slightly more serialised story than the first, basically focusing on bringing the story to a close after the first run was more standalone mysteries. And it's good. It successfully brings everything together. It ties in what was actually quite a complicated web of crime families. Like, I will admit, I reread the first volume before reading the second one, and I'm glad I did that because actually remembering which crime family is which and who murdered who and what had actually happened in the first season was very handy, because these stories, it's a collection of 8 issues each volume, and they're only 16 pages long, so they're very, very, very tight. They're very, very brisk. There's really not much effort given to slowly catch people up. It's very much just throwing you in and just mentioning stuff and talking about things as if you're familiar, which is, very good, solid adult drama. But I was glad I remembered who everyone was. And I think it brings everything together pretty well. There is a part of me that would have liked more, I will admit. Part of me thinks they could have gone for longer on sort of standalone stories, exploring this setup a bit more before bringing about the ending. But it is a good ending. Can't argue with it.
Yeah, the first part was more of a case of the issue. They investigate something that's going on between the crime families, something that Easton Newburn has to resolve. This time there's a bit of that. For example, there's the one when there's a senior Yakuza coming from Japan for heart surgery in America, and they need to find out what information he's given the feds to arrange this. There's a few bits like that, but generally it moves quite quickly into the arc plot of Newburn's secrets being uncovered and his loyalty with the families running out.
Yeah.
But when it gets into that, I think it's really, really good. Like, it does become a very tense, tight thriller, especially in the kind of, issues 13, 14, 15, the kind of building up to the climax of the story. I thought they were really, really gripping, and I just kind of cannoned through them, reading through them very quickly. Real page turners, desperate to find out what happened next. So I think when it really kicked in, I was very, very into this story.
Yeah, no, I've read a lot of these sort of read and watched on TV. A lot of these sort of detective with a slight twist type stories, sort of gimmick crime of varying levels. Like we've covered like Poker Face. I wrote a novel series which was kind of a take on this, and yeah, I enjoy it a lot. I'm a bit picky about which ones I take on, but when I find a good one, I'm very happy. This one is both very good and it does actually have a unique premise for something like this, which is unusual. And yeah, it does a good job of explaining exactly how Newburn's thing works, of him being this sort of one guy who all the crime families sort of trust to look into their business, and then makes it clear how unstable that understanding would have to be and how it could all just tip into disaster if Newburn makes a few fuck-ups.
Yeah, and yeah, he's done various things. He's broken various covenants at different points, and now it's kind of coming back to haunt him in this one as it all starts to unravel, which is quite good in the sense that it's good storytelling, that he doesn't just cover stuff up and get away with it. He kind of gets trapped in the lies he starts telling, and eventually they come back to bring everything down, which is kind of the climax of the story.
Yeah, and it's clearly very, very carefully plotted. Zdarsky clearly, had a lot of this stored up and is just very methodically exposing it, which is obviously a very good way of writing this sort of mystery or detective story or, like, as you say, tight thriller. Like in the first volume we got Emily's secret past, and in the second one we get Newburn's, and yeah, they sort of feed into each other.
Yeah, there's a good sort of backstory filling in there. You find out more about him and how he became the person who he is. Yeah, they kind of fill you in quite early on some of the plot stuff from the first volume, which is useful. They also introduce some new elements. I quite like the investigative journalist character, who kind of uncovers the secrets and the lies that Newburn has told, prodding things, and that kind of helps things unravel. That's an interesting new angle or new character introduced with the second volume.
I liked the twist on that, actually. The way they introduced her. For about the first half of the volume, she's the sort of detective character. And then in the second half, it becomes clear that there's more to her than that.
Yeah, she starts out as a classic gumshoe, more Tintin than like a crime character, and then there's a twist as there. I mean, this comic's always got its eye on a twist or a dramatic reveal, which is one of the reasons why it's so engaging and why I read through it so quickly. It is just well written and well paced, and just like technically very well done.
Yeah, Jacob Phillips. Again, doing a great job with the art. It's a very sort of straightforward, dead-ruled sort of staccato grid. But when you're doing this sort of story, which is very much a sort of moment, this sort of tense, steady build, it works quite well like that. Everything just keeps going relentlessly.
Yes, yeah. The art's very, very good. I did listen back to our review of Newburn Volume 1, and you made a great point, which I'd like to make now, but also, obviously credit to you, which is that there aren't many, full-page splashes or full page panels, partly because it's this 16-page format means it's got to be tight and it's got to be lots of small panels and things like that, but that does mean it's got this real sort of pace to it. It's a similar format you said to Fell as well, which has a similar sort of structure.
Yeah, the Fell format, which Warren Ellis did in the 2000s, which he talked up a lot of the time, and a lot of people were like, oh my god, is this the future of comics? And it did not turn out to be the future of comics. I think there was one other series that did it, and to much success. But yeah, it's good to see it back with Newburn, because I think when you've got the right story, which does seem to be this sort of quite close, confined, fast-moving crime story, it can work really well.
Yeah, which is good. Like I say, the real strength of it is the tension and how engaging the story it is. Yeah, and it's kind of reminded me a lot of some classic crime films, not in a sort of derivative way, in the sense that it's kind of up there with some great crime stories, Godfather, Goodfellas, things like that. It's got a sort of cinematic sort of feel to it. I wouldn't be surprised if this became a film or probably a TV show at some point.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, as I say, this could run longer than it did. I would not be entirely surprised if someone brought this up and turned it into a crime series on one of the US networks that ran for 10 seasons. It very easily could.
Or something that's on a streaming service when they do something shorter, 8 episodes for 5 seasons. But you could do a lot more crime of the week stories of just all sorts of different crimes in New York that Newburn's investigating.
So yeah, it's a very sort of classic story in that regard. I'm always kind of surprised that we don't get more of these in comics, but I guess comics tend to often go for slightly bigger, more action-heavy stuff. But yeah, this was great. Yeah, it doesn't seem to have made a huge splash in the field of comics, which is kind of a shame. But yeah, it's really good. It's really strong. It's one of the better crime comics I've read in quite a while.
Yeah, I really liked it. As you said in the first one, it's interesting. There's no kind of genre twist on it. It is a straight-up crime story. But it is a very good crime story. And yeah, I was a big fan of the crime genre. Like I said, Goodfellas, Godfather, Heat, some of my absolute favourite films. So yeah.
Yeah, I liked, as I said, I already said earlier in this same review, I liked the fact that I'd actually come up with a new take on this. The one guy acting for all the crime families to keep the peace is one of these things that I'm sure someone else has done something similar in the thousands upon millions of pages of crime fiction that have been written, but it's something that hasn't been done to death in recent years, and it felt somewhat interesting and new.
Yeah, and the world it's set in is one of the things that keeps it, as you say, interesting and new. It's quite a dark world. There's a lot of violence. There's a lot of crime. This sense that basically nothing's really valued apart from money and the stability that Newburn brings through his investigations, which is what allows the families to make money. It's quite a sort of grim, cold, calculating world. In some ways, almost like a neoliberal world where the only thing that's really valued is money. Even the cops are just sort of part of this money-making system. Everyone's just kind of wrapped up in this corrupt thing. The only thing that's valued that isn't money is Newburn, who values the truth. And his undoing, as revealed in this part, is when he stops valuing the truth and starts covering up the truth. And that leads to his downfall, which is a nice philosophical twist, very much rooted in this kind of dark world. So, yeah, that's a whole other aspect to this that I really enjoyed.
Yeah, it's got a nice sort of contained world in that there's this place, what is it called, the Black Castle, where they go to receive judgment from this sort of council of crime lords. And that's sort of the one big world-building element, and there are these sort of consistent crime families who come in and out of it. And yeah, even though it's quite, because of the quick pace of it and the short page count, it doesn't get heavily into the world-building. There's a few sort of text pages from Emily's journal which add a little bit, but it still doesn't get massively into deep lore. But it feels like the world is there. It feels like there's more there that could be developed. So again, if they ever did more or adapted it or something.
Yeah, I mean, there's enough, I think, to make you believe that in this world, and like enough detail to make it seem realistic. Yeah, like I say, believable, but it's not hugely complex. I mean, you could uncover more. It's not necessary, only if you wanted to do more issues. But also there's this whole thing of like the piece that Newburn has broken is kind of covering up basically the state of nature, which is just violence. He says a lot, though, if it wasn't for him, there would just be like unrestrained violence on the street. Like at one point he says like children and teenagers just being killed. So there is also that element to it, which is that like, this kind of civilization is this thin veneer of stability we've pasted over violent nature. So yeah, and all that's in the background, but it's, it gives it this sort of meat to it as well.
Yeah, no, as I say, my main emotion on this is to be sorry we didn't get slightly more of it, but at the end of the day, it does mean that it ends up as a very sort of tight, coherent, like 16-chapter novel. I would not be surprised if we get some sort of single, massive collected edition or hardback or something, which you could just tear through all 16 issues like a big chunky crime book, and if they ever make such a thing, I thoroughly recommend it.
Yeah, it would work great as a single graphic novel. I mean, similar to what we were just saying about Lady Parts, is that what I like about this is 2 volumes, 16 issues, tight story, well executed, complete narrative, wraps up well at the end. Job's a good one. Yeah, everyone can walk away feeling very proud of their work on this.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of good comic series which seem to go for about 12-ish issues and then wrap it up. That seems to be a good amount of space to sort of establish a character and some stories, put them through their paces, and then bring it to the end. Watchmen is the most famous one. There's many more. And yeah, this is another one for the annals, I think. Good series. Okay, thank you for listening to Moderate Fantasy Violence. If you have enjoyed this episode, you can find a lot more at moderatefantasyviolence.com, including all our previous episodes, end-of-year lists, and various articles by Alistair, and I think like one article by me. And if you've really enjoyed all that, please review us on your podcast application of choice and give us 5 lovely stars. Thank you.
You can find more from us on social media. Follow us on Facebook by searching for Moderate Fantasy Violence. Follow us on Twitter, where we're at MFV Podcast. Or follow us on Blue Sky, where we're at MFV Podcast. You can follow me on Twitter, Instagram, Blue Sky by searching for Alistair Ball. You can also find more of my writing at redtrainblog.com, or you can find my theatre reviews at Everything Theatre. It's kind of like this, but I'm talking about theatre, not film, TV or comics.
And in the written words rather than the audio form.
Yes, yeah. Those are the crucial differences. Yeah. Conceptually, it's very simple.
Otherwise identical, yeah. Right, yeah, you can also find more from me as NickMB on Twitter, nickbryan.com on Instagram. Generally search for Nick Bryan, and there's a little red cartoon of me looking weirdly angry, which should pop up. And yes, the Courier Z Kickstarter is now finished. Thank you to anyone listening to this who backed. If you somehow missed it, it'll be on sale from my website when we've finished designing it and printing it. Thank you. And we'll be back in 2 weeks, of course, with more Moderate Fantasy Violence. And this time, it's the latest series of Doctor Who, which is just coming to an end. So we'll be covering that, as well as, now that it's dropped on Netflix in the UK, Godzilla -1, one of the best reviewed films of 2023. So we'll see you next time for that. Bye.
Bye.